Speed. America's always had a love affair with speed. It all started here, the Daytona Beach, Florida area. The birth and rise of NASCAR into a motorsport phenomenon was a uniquely American, if improbable, rags to riches story. Carved from the white sands of Daytona and the humble red dirt clay of the southern Piedmont by one very determined man, commanding a roving band of rebels and outlaws. The dawn of the automobile age struck like thunder at the turn of the 20th century, igniting an insatiable fascination for speed throughout the United States. By 1903, adventurous and wealthy sportsmen who could afford to build the latest high-speed contraptions wintered each February in Daytona, where they tested both their courage and skill at nearby Ormond Beach in good-natured but daring duels. The American Automobile Association, or AAA, a new motoring club, soon began to certify the results of the annual speed trials. But while the upper class raced their one-of-a-kind open-wheel creations, the American working class was creating a racing league of its own. Shortly after the first mass-produced, or stock Model T, was introduced in 1908, Midwesterners stripped off the fenders of Henry Ford's invention and went racing on small farms and fairground horse tracks.
It became, well, who's got the fastest car? Well, they had to settle that, so they built them a racetrack out in the dirt, and who had the fastest car, who was the better driver. And pretty soon somebody came up with the idea, well, let's sell tickets, because maybe somebody wants to see this, because I would imagine it's pretty doggone exciting.
With the roaring 1920s, stock car racing continued to grow in popularity among the American hardworking people, spreading beyond the Midwest to every region in the United States. But the glamorous motorsport establishment, led by AAA, snubbed the simple stock cars in favor of the more sophisticated open-wheel race cars.
It's the exclusive Firestone gum-dipping process.
The AAA Contest Board had begun endorsing what would become the most famous open-wheel race in the world, a 500-mile event at the Indianapolis Speedway. The winter event at Ormond Beach was now a highly publicized attraction, establishing the official world land speed record. But the affair was no longer the domain of a privileged few.
Sir Henry Seagrave, a fellow Englishman, had skill and iron nerves. Most important, he had the 1,000-horsepower Sunbeam.
A rapidly increasing number of curious stock car racing fans were traveling to Florida each year to watch the spectacle, which reached its zenith in the 1930s with thrilling competition between gentleman racers Sir Henry Seagrave and Sir Malcolm Campbell. In 1935, Campbell blistered the beach at over 276 miles per hour, but the record-setting runs would not last. The unstable sands of the beach made the competition too dangerous, and the event was moved to the barren salt flats of Utah. The financial loss was a huge blow to the city of Daytona Beach, which was heavily reliant upon the festival for its tourism dollars. To offset the loss of the speed tournament, Daytona Beach officials in 1936 hastily constructed a 3.2-mile beach road course, the unique yet untested track, shaped like a paperclip, connected Daytona's city streets to the beach of the Atlantic Ocean. Thousands of spectators turned out to watch the first two races in 1936 and 37, the first organized stock car events in history. In both races, nearly half of the competitors did not finish because the deep sand in the turns swallowed their heavy stock cars. Despite the turnout, the city lost thousands of dollars. For the 1938 race, desperate city officials asked driver and mechanic Bill France to organize the event. France had shown his savvy by driving his lightweight Ford coupe to a top finish in the first race in '36.
He could see right off the bat, and he was in some of those events, that some more organization needed to be put together.
The tall, lanky France, who had recently moved his young family to Daytona Beach from Washington, D.C., learned his skills while racing the family car on steeply banked board tracks in nearby Maryland. France jumped at the challenge and set himself on a course that would forever change his life.
In the sixth time around, the field has already diminished considerably due to engine failure.
Embarrassed by the earlier failures, AAA flatly refused to endorse France's race, permanently dismissing the common stocks as nothing more than a third-rate joyride for the working class.
Over 50 qualifying cars are lined up in handicap position, awaiting the starting signal that'll send them hurtling over the wind-swept Florida beaches.
The young promoter plunged ahead anyway, determined to make his event a winner. For better traction, he put a special clay in the corners and shortened the race. France displayed a sharp talent for publicity, attracting thousands of spectators. The motley collection of competitors, many of whom were thrill-seeking moonshiners, excited the crowd with their show-stopping antics in a race that came off without a glitch. Miraculously, the first-time promoter turned a profit. With success under his belt, France vowed to prove that AAA was mistaken in their opinion of stock car racing.
Automobile racing has always been popular in the South, long before NASCAR was formed, long before Bill France ever started driving. When the moonshiners started to argue about whose car was better, and they took them out to a racetrack to see if mine was better than yours, these were our guys that are out there racing. And that's what captured the fancy of the people, as opposed to having a bunch of visitors from other sections of the country with highly specialized cars coming.
During the early 1920s, profits from Prohibition flowed like water from a clear mountain stream to bootleggers in the Carolinas, Georgia, and the Virginias, Southern whiskey trippers who had plenty of practice driving on switchback mountain roads, outfitted their Ford coupes with specialized parts and went racing. Shade Tree Mechanics soon joined the outlaw bootleggers when the inexpensive yet powerful Ford flathead engine became more widely available in the 1930s. Anyone with modest mechanical skills could rescue a flathead from the junk heap and rebuild it for racing. Speed spread like gossip through the small, rural hamlets of the southern Piedmont.
W.J. Cash, he was a famous journalist who wrote a book called The Mind of the South, tracing it really back into the 19th century and how in the South there developed this culture built around what he called the hell of a fella, who was the kind of guy who would spontaneously break into foot races, yell out loud, drink as much whiskey as he could possibly hold, doing all sorts of wild stuff. And this became really a mark of manhood for many young men in the South to act like this. When the automobile comes along, it offers them an outlet to express that. So people go into street racing, and then once the tracks grow up, into racing itself. The Piedmont region is the fertile crescent, I guess you would say, of stock car racing, partly because of these cultural values that were so important.
Nowhere was this cultural phenomenon more evident than just outside Atlanta, Georgia. Bootleggers rushed from the North Georgia hills to run at the first organized track in the southern part of the United States, Lakewood Speedway, rightly earning its nickname, the Indianapolis of the South.
We had some showmen back in those days. I mean, sure enough, showmen. At Lakewood, when they come down that chute running over 100 miles an hour, they'd cross a car right in front of the grandstand and stand on it for all his worth. It was a sight to behold.
Lakewood Speedway, in combination with the prosperous Georgia moonshine business, produced a steady stream of young daredevils, establishing the building block of early stock car racing. The track's influence was so widespread that local garages, ready and willing to supply daring drivers with the tools of their trade, sprung up on nearly every corner in downtown Atlanta.
Anybody driving could always get a car to drive. If he didn't own his own, somebody'd be thrilled to death to get one, because usually it kills somebody about once a week, and they didn't have any safety measures in.
It was so dusty, in fact, I'd look at the trees and count 1, 2, 3 and keep looking to the left for the guardrail to know where I was on the track. You couldn't see where you were going.
Along with Langhorne Speedway outside Philadelphia, the 1-mile Georgia dirt track hosted the most significant early stock car races on the East Coast. Lakewood's 18,000-seat grandstand generated handsome prize money, attracting the two most outrageous bootleggers of the day, cousins Rebel Roy Hall and Lloyd C.
Those guys got sharpened their talents by running on the back roads of Georgia and usually outrunning their revenues or whoever was pursuing them. And that was a race you had to win.
In 1938, Lakewood promoted an event they hailed as the National Championship Stock Car Race. The 18-year-old prodigy, C, won the race in a 1934 Ford supplied by another cousin, the dapper and dashing Raymond Parks, owner of the Hemp Hill service station in downtown Atlanta. Hall, who's alleged to have piloted the getaway cars in several bank robberies, just might have been the most talented of the Georgia drivers. But the hell-raising bootlegger lost too much track time, evading the revenuers who were always hot on his tail. He never minded an overnight in jail, for it was a free bed and a free meal. Parks supplied his cousins with 2 brand-new Ford Coupes to drive at Bill France's 1939 Daytona Beach race, making Parks the first multi-car owner in stock car racing history.
But if you got to drive one of his cars, you were in hog heaven, really.
Raymond Parks, a very quiet individual, always well-mannered, well-dressed, and a lot of people wanted to copy after him. And if you could outrun some of the drivers that raced with for Raymond Parks, you had really done something without any doubt about it. In my opinion, the talk was right here in Atlanta when it first started about NASCAR.
Twisting the wrenches for Parks was the brilliant Louis Red Vogt, the finest stock car mechanic of his era. Vogt's garage in downtown Atlanta supplied customers on both sides of the law, but he preferred supplying the whiskey runners because they paid in cash on the spot, while the checks to the revenuers were slow to arrive from Washington, D.C.
There were some revenuers that were just as famous for their driving as some of the moonshiners were. He would build these guys these moonshine cars for a certain route from Dawsonville to Atlanta. He built a special car for these people.
By 1940, France and the spectacular Georgians were stars on the Southern racing circuit, a disorganized and corrupt collection of races run on old dirt horse tracks, better suited for beasts than men. On the strength of 2 wins, France was declared the national stock car champion in 1940, though there was no formal point system to verify the title. He also continued to promote races on the beach. Big Bill's reputation for honesty spread among the drivers, who rewarded him by showing up on time at his Daytona races, entertaining the crowd with legendary style. In 1941, Lloyd C. flipped his car twice at the beach and still managed to finish 4th, taking the checkered flag riding on just 2 wheels. 3 years later, the young driver was shot dead by his cousin Woodrow Anderson in an argument over moonshine. Just as Bill France's outfit was hitting its stride, the United States entered World War II, ending auto racing of any kind in America. All of America's resources, both human and material, were put towards the war. France joined the cause as an engine foreman in a Daytona shipyard. The racing engines were silent in America from 1942 to 1945. But that instantly changed the day America triumphed in World War II. Americans, proud but weary, were ready to move on with their lives. They filled the grandstands of many spectator sports, but especially auto racing, now called America's sport, because of its dangerous nature and spirit of adventure. In the first race in 1945, Rebel Roy Hall edged past Bill France to win a 75-mile thriller at Lakewood. The Parks boat team won 4 straight races on the beach from 1946 to 49. Atlanta native Eddie Samples was recognized as the national champion in 1946. Another Georgian, Gober Sosby, won 3 straight modified races on the beach. Raymond Parks added Red Byron, and the fabulous Flying Flock brothers, Bob and Fontarello, to his stable of drivers. The talented brothers were the oldest members of the first family effort in stock car racing, the Daredevil Flocks.
How long have you been in the racing business, Fonty? Since 1938.
Bob and the flashy Fonty got their start in bootlegging at the urging of their mother, the widowed Big Mama Flock, who had struggled to feed her family working at a hosiery mill.
What's your mother think about all this?
Well, my mother's got gray hair.
Well, I don't wonder. Well, I certainly would like to.
My mother's interested and she's here.
Oh, she's here, Mom. Oh,
Come in here, Mother.
That's right.
what do you think about all
Oh, I
this?
think they're wonderful, aren't
Do
they?
you?
Yeah, I just keep my fingers crossed.
The brothers ran whiskey for their uncle Peachtree Williams, who was one of Atlanta's most prosperous moonshiners. The Atlanta Police Department could never capture bail jumper Bob, so city officials passed an ordinance stating that no one could compete at Lakewood if they had a case pending in the Atlanta courts. Racing under an alias, Bob snuck into one race. The police had arranged a dragnet to capture the wily driver after the race, but Bob, as usual, was one step ahead of the law.
When you go down the front straightaway at Lakewood, there's a little short driveway type thing that goes right out to the road, and he just went right out that way and hit the road and took off, and the police took off after him. They never did catch him.
Adventure was not limited to the Flock brothers. Sisters Rio and Ethel were just as high-flying as their brothers. Rio was an accomplished motorcycle racer who often wore a 6-shooter pistol at her side. She was one of America's first female biplane wing walkers. Sister Ethel Flock later joined the stock car racing circuit, becoming one of the very first female racers in Bill France's venture. But it was the youngest Flock, Tim, who would later establish some of the most enduring achievements in NASCAR history. In 1946, France quit driving to devote full attention to promoting, as he now had stiff competition from other racing organizations. He expanded his racing operation to small tracks throughout the South, and he even dreamed of the day he would take his show nationwide. In a chance meeting with the cantankerous Charlotte newspaperman Wilton Garrison, France was offered some advice that would help him distance his operation from rivals and mark a crucial turning point in stock car racing history. France went to Garrison seeking press coverage for an upcoming race. The young promoter claimed his race would decide the national champion that year. Garrison point-blank asked him how he could make such a statement.
And he finally asked him, to answer your question, what do you think we need to do? And he says, well, you need to have records. You need to keep track of who did what, the score, like baseball does. So a point system was added to establish the championship for the following year. And we've had a championship ever since.
Garrison also suggested France create a series of races where the rules were consistently the same and regularly enforced. He also recommended France turn to his old nemesis, AAA, for organizational support.
He went to the 3A, which was the paramount sanctioning organization at that time. They came off of the Indianapolis 500, was their biggest event. And they told him they weren't interested in it. The term was, we're only interested in the big stuff.
This fresh insult by the sanctioning body, similar to the one France endured in 1938, both haunted and motivated Big Bill France throughout his early years as a promoter. AAA had a stranglehold on many of the sport's most profitable venues, so the rejection meant France would have to, for the most part, limit his promotion to tracks throughout the South. In 1947, France rebounded with willful confidence, announcing he would direct a series of races, not just one race at a time. France's promotional slogan for the new series was, "Where the fastest that run the fastest." France welcomed back to his new series the returning war veterans, many of whom brought home crucial knowledge in mechanics, aerodynamics, and battlefield experience that they would apply to racing. Furthermore, the brave, adrenaline-fueled, hell of a fella nature of the Southern drivers and mechanics and owners had made them very courageous soldiers.
They know that to get where you have to go, you have to give more than 100%. You can't just sit there and let things happen. You have to make something happen. And that's what these guys from the South did. When they went to Europe, they wanted to come home. They knew they had to get through with things before they could come home. You weren't going to come home till the war was over, or you were in a body bag.
Growing up on his family's Spartanburg, South Carolina farm in the 1930s, Walter Bud Moore sharpened his natural gift for mechanics by repairing old farm machinery. On carefree Sunday afternoons, Moore and his 6 brothers stiffened the suspensions and doctored the engines of old Model T Fords and went racing.
We got to where we're taking the bodies off of them, making what we call a strip down. We really made us a little race car out of them, especially out of the T models and some of the A models we had. And we probably had 15 or 20 of them there, and running those things all over the farm, racing with them. That's how I really got interested in this stuff.
As a teenager, Moore had journeyed down to Daytona Beach whenever he could to catch a glimpse of the exciting beach races, dreaming that he might one day field a car there himself. But war interrupted his plans. By the spring of 1944, the 20-year-old Moore was a member of the 90th Infantry Division. And on June 6th, D-Day, his company, a heavy weapons unit, took part in the historic invasion of the Allied forces against the Germans at Normandy, France. As artillery shells and machine gun fire rained down upon him, Moore and his company stormed Utah Beach, one of the most strategic and dangerous landing zones in the invasion.
We were trained, the first thing to do and the best thing to do is get off of that beach as fast as you could. I had a 51-pound machine gun tripod on my shoulders and my backpack and all I did is didn't pay no attention to anything or anybody, just went straight in. I was completely out of breath and scared to death, I don't mind telling you.
Moore was injured 5 times throughout the course of the war in Europe, returning each time after his recovery. Now attached to Patton's Third Army, Moore and his Jeep driver came upon an enemy unit that had made a small farmhouse their headquarters.
So I blasted a couple more times in the winter to let them know we meant business. They stuck out a white flag and they come walking out there and I couldn't believe it. We had 27 enlisted men and 5 German officers.
Moore remained on the front lines until the end of the European War, 8 months and 14 days. For his faithful service and heroism, he was awarded 2 Bronze Stars and 5 Purple Hearts. Moore returned home to South Carolina and opened up a used car business, but on nights and weekends, he built lightning-fast Ford coupes. Car owner Raymond Parks served throughout the entire war as a machine gunner in the 99th Infantry of the First Army in Europe, at one point living in foxholes for 109 days. At Elsbourne Ridge, on the northern edge of the Ardennes forest, Parks fought in the decisive Battle of the Bulge during one of the harshest winters of the century. Raymond Parks and Bud Moore were just two of the many racing pioneers who served America in World War II. After their intense battle experiences, these men could not imagine returning to a life working in just a mill or a factory.
They got to the racetrack and they heard the noise, they saw the excitement, and they saw the rush. The cars rushing around the racetrack, and they strapped in and went on it.
At Daytona, Parks' driver, Red Byron, captured the first race of France's new series. The intelligent and modest Byron was refined compared to most of the drivers on the stock car circuit. While serving as a flight engineer in a B-24 bomber during the war, he was shot down over the Aleutian Islands in the Pacific. Critically wounded, Byron spent 27 months in Army hospitals, fighting off doctors who wanted to amputate both legs. Byron's return to racing was a miracle.
He, of all people, really exemplifies that individual who came out of the service, who just couldn't give up that adrenaline rush that they had experienced during the war. His left leg was permanently damaged, and they had to make a special stirrup so he could operate the clutch. And to go out and to be as successful as he was is a pretty incredible story.
Other competitors in that first season included 18-year-old rookie Glenn Fireball Roberts and 33-year-old newcomer Lee Petty. Crowd pleaser Fonty Flock, driving a Parks Vote Beauty, captured the first series title in 1947. France kept his promise and awarded Flock a big, beautiful trophy and a $1,000 check. Flock also appeared on the cover of the first issue of the magazine Speed Age.
Because my husband's in the Navy, and I want to do a job that means more than working in a department store.
Big Bill was always on the lookout for new talent, and he found it in the Rosie the Riveter generation of World War II women. France would add a lady to his racing ticket for his next race at the new Greenville-Pickens, South Carolina track. He asked around town for the best lady driver. He didn't have to look too far to find Louise Smith, a 30-year-old South Carolina cotton mill worker who stood no taller than 5 feet, but she had what counted most in stock car racing, a brave heart and a lead foot.
Oh, yeah, I'd outrun every cop in here around this part of the country.
She was a real hot rod around town, and she liked to literally race the policemen back to where she lived. She got quite a reputation in the Greenville, South Carolina area.
France paid Smith $100 per race in appearance money. In a press release, he touted her as the first lady of stock car racing. But her male counterparts were not too happy with her presence on the track.
If they didn't want a woman out there, they figured a woman get in the way.
Smith, who had no formal racing experience, competed in her first event driving a hot rod coupe supplied by Big Bill France. Believing she wouldn't last long in the race, officials didn't even bother to instruct her on the rules.
So the race was over with, but all of a sudden they look out and Louise is still going around the racetrack. So they said, well, maybe she missed the checkered flag. The flagman waves at her again, and she just keeps on going. Finally, the guy says, well, throw the red flag. Maybe, I don't know if I remember telling her about the checkered flag. So now the guy did tell her that when a red flag ever flew, that means stop. So they actually had to throw the red flag after the race is over with to get her to stop the race car.
They didn't say a thing about checker flag, and I had sense enough to know that a green flag meant go, but that's all I did know.
Fellow racer Buddy Schumann got tired of seeing Smith bounced around on the track, so he offered her some helpful advice.
He showed me just a spot on the back bumper you could touch them, and you could cut them a flip. So I did that. I knocked a few of them out of the way. It was kind of funny, and it made the news that day, and we didn't have much news, no way. I was fired up. I really was.
Smith became the first regular female competitor on France's circuit. And for her feisty personality, the men nicknamed her the Agitator. In 1949, she snuck down to Daytona, telling her husband she was going on a vacation. Instead, she took the family car and entered it into the beach race. She flipped over in the treacherous north turn, but with the help of spectators, she turned the car back up and continued on, finishing 20th. Smith salvaged what was left of the car and started the long drive back to Greenville, wondering how she would ever explain the mangled car to her husband. But she never made it. She broke down in Augusta, Georgia, abandoning the heap at a body shop.
I left it down there at Jack Dempsey's place to be fixed, and he'll fix it and my husband won't know the difference. And I caught the bus to home, and I thought I was getting away with something, and I'd come in the office. He said, "Where's the car?" I said, "That old thing ain't no good." I said, "It broke down on me on the other side of Augusta, and I had to catch a bus to Greenville." He said, "You did?" I said, "Yeah." He spread it out in newspaper. The whole section was in big pictures, Louis Smith wrecks at Daytona. And I looked at him and I didn't know what to think. And I just turned around and walked out the door. I was scared for him to come home that night. I didn't know what he was gonna do. He kindly got over it, and he said, "If Bill France calls again," said, "take your clothes." I said, "That ain't hard to do. I ain't got but 2 more blouses." And I put them in the back of the race car.
Despite her husband's warning, Smith continued racing. She was a member of a small sorority of women who competed alongside the men in stock car racing events from 1946 to 1956. Sarah Christian was the most naturally talented of the lady drivers. France hailed the Atlanta housewife as the leading woman stock car driver in the country. Ethel Flock also competed, head-to-head with the rough-and-tumble men.
She ran, I think, about 8 different races with the boys on the track. And she loved to compete with her brothers, and not only compete with them, but loved to beat them.
With the Garrison reprimand in the back of his mind, France gathered a hand-picked collection of drivers, owners, and mechanics, 35 people in all, to the Streamline Hotel in Daytona Beach in December of 1947 to discuss the future of stock car racing. The purpose of the meeting was to adopt a standard of rules and form a governing body to oversee the future of the series. Top mechanic Red Vogt from Atlanta came up with the name of the new organization, NASCAR, the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing. NASCAR was formally incorporated in February 1948, and France was voted president and awarded the majority of the stock. New cars were still in short supply, so drivers in France's series continued to compete in pre-war modified coupes. These hot rods were preferred by purists, like the young hotshot Fireball Roberts, because they could be easily altered with specialized parts to reach higher speeds. The first NASCAR sanctioned race took place at Daytona in February 1948. A crowd of 14,000 paid $2.50 each to watch disabled World War II hero Red Byron continue his riveting comeback by winning the action-packed event. Byron went on to capture the overall series championship, winning 11 times. A punishing schedule of 52 events were held in the first NASCAR 48 season, despite a 2-week interruption due to a polio outbreak. Sadly, Slick Davis became the first NASCAR driver to die in action when he was killed while racing in Greensboro, North Carolina. By now, France was competing against no less than 6 other racing organizations. His most menacing rival was promoter Bruton Smith, whose operation began challenging France for supremacy. France took a giant leap of faith and promoted an event featuring only late-model, strictly stock automobiles. Big Bill's instinct told him fans would be more interested in races featuring cars that they could actually drive themselves. Only full-size family cars could qualify, and they could not be altered in any way from the factory version, except to reinforce the wheels for safety. On June 19, 1949, 13,000 fans, twice the number the grandstands could hold, showed up for the historic event at the Charlotte Speedway. 33 competitors in all, driving 9 popular makes of cars, started the race.
It was the Osco, a major one. They didn't have enough police, didn't expect as big a crowd. The track got so rough that they had to stop it a couple of times because you were afraid of killing somebody.
Most of those cars that was in that first race probably were rentals. Probably about 20 of them were rentals.
The Flock brothers were the main attraction as they held the first 3 starting positions. On race day, Tim Flock, who by now was a 2-year veteran of France's circuit, convinced a spectator who was just minding his business in the infield to let him borrow and race the man's brand new Oldsmobile 88 family car. Sarah Christian qualified 13th, driving a Ford owned by her husband, Frank, and Lee Petty also borrowed a 47 Buick from a gas station owner.
They drove it to Charlotte, pulled it in a Texaco station, put it up on the rack, raised it up, greased the thing, changed oil, filled it up with gas, put a number on it with tape, and drove it down to the racetrack.
The atmosphere was electric as cars of every size, shape, and color kicked up a dust bowl around the tattered 3/4-mile track for the 150-mile race. Glenn Dunaway, who was driving a Ford owned by a well-known bootlegger, crossed the finish line 3 laps ahead of Jim Roper. In the very first NASCAR post-race inspection, officials discovered illegal wedge springs on the winning car. The springs, a common bootleg trick, were of course not in the Ford parts catalog. Dunaway was disqualified.
Dunaway's car owner sued NASCAR and sought to have the win handed back to him. And the courts upheld NASCAR's point of view, which was a very pivotal moment in racing because it gave NASCAR and its founder, Big Bill France, the authority to both set and enforce regulations.
Jim Roper was declared the winner of the race, and Lee Petty was the only driver to crash.
They'd run about half the race and broke something on the car and blew a tire, turned the thing over, tore all the doors off of it. Then my brother and myself and mother and Daddy then thumbed a ride with his brother back home.
France held 7 more strictly stock races in 1949, the only promoter to offer such racing. For the 2nd year in a row, Red Byron captured the overall championship. Remarkably, Sarah Christian finished the year 13th in points, well ahead of her husband Frank, who finished tied for 26th. Christian made 6 starts in the inaugural strictly stock season, recording a 5th place at Pittsburgh-Heidelberg Speedway, still, to this day, the best finish ever by a woman in NASCAR. The growing France racing operation was a close-knit family affair.
All of us did different jobs. We parked cars, we sold tickets, we put guardrail in, swept the track, we put calcium chloride on the dirt tracks to keep the dust down, watered the tracks, you name it. Mother sold tickets and kept the books and tried to make sure there was more money in the bank than what we were spending. When he would do something a little bit wild and take a chance and it was a loser, she'd always be able to wake up the next day and do business.
Now, this was a smart man, and his wife Annie, they were 2 smart people, because here he was making all these deals and she's in the back door trying to hold off the creditors.
And he was bullheaded to a degree. He didn't want to take no for an answer. If he hit one dead-end road, he'd try and find another road.
Big Bill was a charismatic and intimidating figure with considerable skills of persuasion. France used an iron hand to control the pit area.
Well, he was extremely strong-willed. He believed in doing things his way. There was a lot of differences of opinion. Most of the time, he would win the war.
He listened a lot, and then when he said something, he always said something that was worthwhile listening to.
Well, Bill France would help anybody. He knew that you needed help, and he would come up to you and just say, you know, he used to call everybody son. He says, "Can I help you? What do you need?"
He got a lot of drivers started in racing, and he used to loan them money, and, you know, it might have been an ulterior motive. He had them in his hand if he did that.
He used one against the other. The old game of just using, playing one end against the other, and that's how you got it rolling.
He was 6'4" and pretty solid individual, and he had a lot of confidence. He knew what he was doing.